Cool. Okay. I like this format. I like also being sandwiched in this kind of beautiful, I'm like the meat and you're the bread. Or as someone said, I was kind of the wild card of this session, so I don't know what that means. I might be a bit of a wild card because I'm a curator, and everybody's a curator these days, but I'm actually a disciplinary curator, which means I work in a museum. Do people go to museums anymore? Yes, you see, this is the right kind of audience. I spend a lot of time thinking about what design means. And that's design from the scale of the hand, as in the kind of smartphone that we have, to the scale of the whole planet. So it's a pretty big territory. And for me, it's really important to use the format of the exhibition. I think the exhibition is a very, very powerful vehicle to think about things. Why? Because they are social spaces, right? We go to museums not to look at things. We go to museums and exhibitions to look at other people. And then we look at things. Like a museum only works if there's a good toilet and a good cafe, right? And then everything else is kind of secondary. You know, I think that first and foremost, we're going to be around each other. And that's a very interesting question when you start to think about an exhibition like this one, which I'm showing you now, which ran at the Design Museum in London between 2022 and 2023. It was called Weird Sensation Feels Good. It was the first museum exhibition about the world of ASMR, Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. Has anyone heard about ASMR? Yeah, exactly. We all watch it to fall asleep at night, don't we? Something like that. You might have seen, for those of you who don't know, ASMR artists whispering and tapping into microphones on YouTube. But this was not an exhibition that was trying to, it was trying to not only shine a light on what I determined to be a very important grassroots world of creativity, which emerged pre-pandemic and is much older than now, but it was also an exhibition about loneliness, isolation, and emerging forms of connectivity, and emerging forms of intimacy, too. Something that we're all kind of engaged in. Yeah, what was that? Was that the tongue? Yeah. It's an amazing work by a Swedish artist, actually, called Tobias Bradford, called Immeasurable Thirst. And there's a fantastic TikTok with about 70 million views of that, set to the song Slipping Through My Fingers All the Time by ABBA. This is some kind of, this is a summary of what an exhibition can be, right? An exhibition can be this sort of major vehicle where we all come together and we think about things that we might not have heard about. And also exhibitions can be critical vehicles. When I first brought up the question of ASMR, for example, in 2020 at Arcades in Stockholm, everyone was like, what are you talking about? That's a ridiculous concept. I'm not going to go to that exhibition. A few years later, there was an article in The Spectator called Why is ASMR Evil, right? And that's interesting because you can engender a certain criticality through the vehicle of the exhibition. But I'm not actually going to talk to you about ASMR today. I'm going to talk to you about something that's of the same sphere, of the same world, and I'm going to talk to you about something that will manifest in a big exhibition next year, this time next year. It's part of a longer-term research that I've been trying to engage with about worlding, world-making, world-building, or I guess my preferred term right now, worldglimpsing. And let's try to consider these words for a second. There is, of course, absolutely nothing new on this earth, right? ASMR, for example, is primal. It goes back to the core idea of softness that we all have within us. And the same thing goes for this concept of worldglimpsing. World building or worlding is, of course, a very historically charged and largely problematic term that suggests that a vision or a world is coming under someone or a group of people's idea. But this idea of world glimpsing I like because it suggests that we can't see the totality of the fiction that is being made, right? And I don't know how you feel, but that's how I feel when I'm being a human. I'm like, wow, it's all so big. There's so much that I can't see. And that's exciting. For a while, I've been really engaging with conversations, and this is also kind of what a curator does, right? We do a lot of chatting with super interesting people, far more interesting than me, with designers, role players, LARP designers, playsmiths, trying to understand these people who are spending their lives constructing alternate worlds to help us understand the world we are in, right? Making planet Bs in order to think about how we might deal with the polycrises of planet A. There's not much time right now to go through all of these in detail. You have to come to the exhibition to see that. But I'm going to take you through some of the really fascinating concepts that offer ways out of the situation that we might in. Now let's start with role play, which is a rapidly and growing form of worldglimpsing. We're all familiar with the concept of role play, right? Because we're literally all doing it now. Like, I'm being like guy on the stage, talking stuff, and you're being engaged, critical listener, perhaps, or something else. We all are switching roles depending on context, mood, state of mind, the people we're in. When we're at work, we're one person. When we're with a friend, we're another person. It's a core part of the human experience. But we've also been designing through role play for a very long time. I was like a little bit too old for Tamagotchi. Did anybody ever have a Tamagotchi? There was like a very peak moment, right? My sister had a Tamagotchi. It's so interesting because like this is like a little egg, which of course is like conceptually and formally interesting in its own right, with a character, and it has a life cycle. And the character dies if you don't look after it, and then it dies eventually anyway. But in this little object, right, is a whole secret to design. We are in an age where we are designing ourselves, and that design of the self is very much in the hands of corporations. We need to start to move outside of what that means. We need to bring worldglimpsing back into its role as a civic act, because we can all do it. It's political. You know, I don't call myself an art curator. Art curators are great, but the thing about architecture and design is they are inherently political. They are the background to our very existence. We exist within buildings. They shape our lives. And that's what I find interesting about role play and live action role play as a creative practice, because it can be harnessed, it can be shaped, and it can be applied. One of the largest movements, of course, is this idea of live-action role-play. And this is just an image from actually a Swedish children's TV show, which depicts one version of a live-action role-play. People coming together, imagining, speculating, and playing. Live-action role-play, some of you may have heard of it, some of you might not have heard of it. It's kind of like a semi-subculture going mainstream right now. Interestingly enough, the Swedish version of LARP, Levande rollspel, has actually been classed as intangible cultural heritage in Sweden, and that's because the Nordic region is a has a very rich heritage when it comes to what live-action role-play is. What is it? Does anybody LARP in here? We have a very specifically important person in the audience, Johanna, who is a significant voice in the LARP design community. The way that I tend to describe it to anybody who hasn't done it is imagine living inside a video game, right? You embody a character, you wear their clothes, you take on their burdens, you interact with others as them, you live a version of reality through them. There's a kind of script, there's a game master, and then there's a lot of improvisation on top of that. A LARP can last for an hour, it can last for days, it can last for weeks, sometimes even beyond that. And LARPing is like playing a video game or even a board game, except you're actually doing it, right? It's an embodied practice. You are physically there with others, immersed in a version of the world and a version of yourself. And I believe that LARP, architecture and design, and many other kind of canonical fields of design all share the same ground because they imagine and make real alternate realities. So take an architect, for example. What architects do, in the case of like this building, for example, is they project into the world. They create something. And what LARP designers do, and those who are engaging, they project worlds. Literally. And that's a very critical difference. One word, but being able to engage in these participatory and speculative worlds is something that's very powerful and very unique. And LARP also expands our experiential understanding of the world. It pushes at the limits of ourselves. And so you see how we're moving from the planet through community back to the self. Like, that's the power of design. It pushes at the limits that we draw ourselves. So like, a limit that I have is like cis man, right? But in engaging with a live action role play, I can be no gender, or I can be something else. And that, I think, is powerful and fascinating. It's ultimately an exercise in empathy, because it designs situations also where you can start to perceive the world from the point of view of someone else. You can be human, you can be non-human, and so on and so forth. Now, as I said before, live-action roleplay is not new, right? Imagining fictions is like a core part of the human experience. We've been doing it since the dawn of time. But what it becomes interesting is that the ways in which we're doing it now is new. And that deserves serious acknowledgement and contemplation. Practices like live-action roleplay are important because they often don't close narratives that are before us. They actually open up spaces for new narratives, for alternate ways of being. And a well-designed LARP is a very complex thing, full of negotiations, contracts, onboarding, offboarding, tools and techniques for handling things like safety and consent and trying to understand how we navigate between these worlds. Now, for LARPs to work, they have to construct a consensus reality, which is a little bit like a suspension of disbelief. And the players then become stewards of fragile worlds that are created in which mutual care is a foundational pillar. And within a character, you then sort of find out things about yourself, that you might not have known before. And sometimes these things are empowering, and sometimes these things are a bit ugly. And this is where this very beautiful concept of bleed comes in. And I understand this concept of bleed through the fantastic artists and designers Omsk Social Club, where they really articulate this concept as the overlap between player and character, okay? So despite being in a game, you're also bringing a lot of you into that character. And ultimately, I guess the simplest way to describe it is like you and I are LARPing, right? And we're playing characters. And then we finish the LARP, and then I'm in love with you. But I don't know whether I'm in love with you, or I'm in love with your character, or my character's in love with you, or my character's in love with your character. So, this is, whoa. So, this is fascinating because it starts to reveal like how slippery we are, We're so slippery, and I love the goo of us all. And then through workshops and through briefings and through debriefings, this transition is kind of eased, and this becomes a reminder and a tool, right? That to say that we are overlapping between each other, but also within ourselves. Our identities are malleable things. Now, immersion, I'm going to speed up now because there's a timer going red in front of me. But I think a lot about the idea of immersion, which is a very fundamental part of the world that I'm trying to describe to you. It's something that obviously many people are thinking about, and I often return back to a quote from an amazing Substack article by Terry Nguyen, who said that modern life seems to be structured around distractions, such as today we seek out its opposite, pure immersion. And I think we all can understand that now. Like, we can all relate to that sort of like desire or need. We don't really know why we're moving towards that, but we are living in an age of obsessive immersion. I don't have a problem with that, but I think we need to then really start to think about how we're doing it and the tools we have. And things like live-action roleplay are very powerful, soft, slippery vehicles through which to navigate that complexity beautifully. When we talk about obsessive immersion, of course, we bring it back up a scale again now to the scale of architecture. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah, this is the Sphere in Las Vegas under construction. The Sphere in Las Vegas, I mean, Google it. It's absolutely crazy. It is like the most incredible example of non-contextual architecture in, of course, what has to be the strangest city in the world, Las Vegas. It's essentially a planet-shaped building covered in a screen. And does this, if I just work this? Yeah, this is working. This is a YouTube video I just found. This is the Sphere waking up on a Las Vegas morning. So it's a building in which the whole outside is a screen, and then inside is another screen. And I don't want to be super critical against this multi-billion-dollar project, but this is the wrong kind of immersion, right? This is an immersion in which you are negating and neglecting and throwing away and trying to hide and focus into this world that someone has created. I'm not saying this can't be utterly magical, but it's a bit more complicated than that, right? And we need to embrace that complexity. And I'm so on time here. The final thing I want to talk about is very simply play. And again, I don't want to be critical, but it's not that kind of play that we have. I mean, IKEA are great, but they've got this very sort of narrow understanding of play. Play is also so sophisticated, no? And as adults, no one really plays. So live-action role-play, at its fundamental core, is a game. It's a game, and through play and playfulness, we can talk about the most serious things. I returned back to that exhibition about ASMR. Like I said, it was an exhibition about ASMR, and people giggle at ASMR. ASMR is weird. People laugh at ASMR artists. But actually, it was an exhibition about loneliness and isolation. And through understanding why ASMR artists are doing this thing and what reaction it gives to you, you can start to understand bigger questions that bind us, that connect us. To just bring it back down a little bit into a Swedish context, at Moderna Museet, which is the Modern Art Museum of Sweden, in 1968, which is a very amazing time for that museum, actually. If you're into exhibition history, you should look at that period. There was an exhibition called Modellen. And in this exhibition, you see photographs here of Olof Palme, probably the most famous and significant prime minister of Sweden, jumping into a kind of like proto-ball pit, right, made of foam. And it's just an amazing image because I don't see those images now. I don't see people who are very serious and have massive amounts of responsibility actually engaging with play and acknowledging play as something that can actually change the world. And so this is the thread that I just wanted to seed in your mind in my little sandwich here. I hope it was interesting, and I hope you can maybe follow some of the work and come to the exhibition in September next year, Stockholm. Thank you.